There is a certain kind of person who walks away from a conversation and cannot quite explain what just happened. Nothing was shouted. No names were called. But somewhere between the first sentence and the last, something was taken from them. A quiet confidence they had that morning is simply gone. They sit with it for hours, replaying the words, searching for the exact moment their chest tightened and their voice became smaller. They wonder if they are being too sensitive. They wonder if they imagined it. And that wondering is precisely what the other person was counting on. But if you know someone like this, or if you are someone like this, then you already understand that this is not about being weak. It is about being someone whose nervous system is honest enough to register damage that others have learned to disguise as perfectly normal conversation. Today we are going to decode the psychology of people who make others feel small, why certain people are more vulnerable to them, what is actually happening in the brain during these interactions, and most importantly, the proven psychological steps to stop giving away your sense of self to someone who was never entitled to it. So why does this happen? Why do some people seem to shrink in the presence of certain individuals while others walk away completely unbothered? The answer lives in two places at once. It lives in the person doing the diminishing, and it lives in the nervous system of the person being diminished. Understanding both is where real freedom begins. Some people are born with what psychologist Elaine Aron identified as sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS. These highly sensitive persons, or HSPs, process social information at a neurological depth that others simply do not reach. A dismissive tone, a subtle eye roll, a pause that lasts 1 second too long, their brain registers all of it as fully as others register a shout. Others were built this way through childhood. Picture a child who grew up beside someone whose approval was the weather in the house. Some days warm and golden. Other days cold without explanation. That child became an expert reader of subtle signals, because reading them correctly was how they stayed safe. They learned that someone's quiet disapproval was a storm worth fearing. In both groups, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, becomes calibrated to social diminishment the way a seismograph calibrates to tremors. It does not wait for an earthquake to respond. It responds to the faintest vibration beneath the surface, long before the ground has cracked, long before anyone else in the room has felt a thing. What began as protection became a permanent setting. The child who learned to brace for subtle criticism grew into an adult who braces instinctively. The sensitivity that once preserved them in an unpredictable environment now makes them exquisitely available to anyone who has learned to use subtlety as a weapon. So when this enters adult life, it does not look like childhood fear. It looks like a friend who always leaves them feeling slightly less than. A colleague whose compliments carry a quiet sting. A partner whose humor reliably lands at their expense. It looks ordinary. That is precisely what makes it so difficult to name and so easy to absorb. The first sign that someone is making them feel small is that this person consistently reframes their achievements in ways that reduce them, always dressed in the language of perspective or helpfulness, never in the language of cruelty. They mention a promotion at dinner. Before the moment can breathe, the other person says, "Oh, that department is really struggling, isn't it? Good, they finally filled the role." The achievement is not attacked. It is simply surrounded by context until it disappears. They drive home wondering why the best news of their year feels hollow. This tactic exploits the default mode network, or DMN, the brain's self-referential processing center. When new information arrives alongside negative framing, the DMN incorporates the framing into self-evaluation automatically. They are not choosing to feel diminished. Their brain is doing what brains do, absorbing the full emotional package, not just the words. The emotional consequence is a specific, disorienting grief. Not the grief of a clear loss, but the grief of a joy that was present and then, inexplicably, was not. They cannot point to the wound because it was made with a word, not a blade. And wounds made with words are the hardest to show anyone, including themselves. And this erosion of joy pulls them directly into the second sign, which is that around this person they notice themselves editing before they even speak, measuring every word for how it might be used against them. They have good news, but they share it carefully, already trimming it down before it leaves their mouth. They have an opinion, but they hold it lightly, ready to withdraw it the moment a certain eyebrow shifts. They are not conversing anymore. They are performing a constant risk assessment with their own voice as the asset they are trying to protect. What is happening here is hypervigilance operating inside the brain's prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for social prediction and behavioral regulation. The prefrontal cortex is working overtime, running simulations of every possible response to every possible thing they might say. It is consuming cognitive and emotional resources at a rate the rest of their life can feel. The emotional consequence is that they slowly become a smaller version of themselves in this person's presence. Not because they have less to offer, but because offering it has become indistinguishable from offering it up to be taken apart. Silence begins to feel safer than speech, and safety should never come at the cost of being heard. The third sign is that this person has a consistent habit of interrupting them, speaking over them, or simply changing the subject at the precise moment their words were about to matter. They are mid-sentence, sharing something that genuinely matters to them, and the other person pivots. Not rudely, but cleanly, as if their sentence had already ended. At a group dinner, the conversation they started is claimed by someone else 3 exchanges later, and the original person watches it travel the table without them. It happens again and again, always with plausible deniability. This behavior targets mirror neurons, the brain's social resonance system responsible for creating the felt experience of being seen and heard. When mirror neurons fire in response to genuine mutual attention, the brain releases connection-confirming chemistry. When that attention is consistently denied, the brain begins to associate this relationship with a subtle but real form of social rejection. The emotional consequence is that they begin to question whether what they have to say is worth saying at all. The problem is never framed as the other person's behavior. It is always quietly filed under their own inadequacy. They do not think, "They keep interrupting me." They think, "I must not be interesting enough to finish." The fourth sign is that this person uses humor as a delivery system for criticism, and any objection to the joke is immediately reframed as the other person's inability to take a joke. They make an error at work. The person laughs first, then says, "Classic you." It is said with a smile. Everyone else laughs lightly. They laugh too, because the only alternative is to look like the difficult one in the room. Later that night they sit with the specific ache of having laughed at their own diminishment and not knowing how to explain why that ache is real. This dynamic hijacks the insular cortex, which governs interoception, the brain's mapping of internal emotional states. The mixed signal, laughter on the outside, discomfort on the inside, creates an internal contradiction the insular cortex cannot reconcile neatly. The result is a low, nameless unease that lingers far longer than the moment that caused it. The emotional consequence is a particular kind of loneliness that sits beside confusion. They wonder if they are the problem. They wonder if they are too sensitive. And the person who made them feel small has already moved on, unbothered, because for them, nothing of significance happened at all. The fifth sign is perhaps the quietest of all. It is that after spending time with this person, they need hours, sometimes days, to feel like themselves again, and they cannot fully explain why. A 2-hour lunch leaves them exhausted in a way that a full day of work does not. They come home and sit quietly, staring at nothing, not sad exactly but somehow emptied. Their partner asks if they are okay. They say yes. They say it was a normal lunch. And in saying that, they wonder quietly if something is wrong with them for needing so long to recover from something so ordinary. What they are recovering from is the biological cost of sustained cortisol elevation. Every subtle threat, every careful edit of their words, every moment of bracing for the next reframe, each one triggers a small release of cortisol, the body's stress hormone. Individually, each release is minor. Cumulatively, across a 2-hour meal, they amount to a physiological event the body needs real time to process. The emotional consequence is that they begin to organize their life around recovery from this person rather than around joy. They start declining invitations. They start dreading messages. They build in buffer days around encounters the way a body builds scar tissue around a wound, quietly, without anyone asking it to. The sixth sign is the one that takes longest to see, because it wears the face of loyalty. It is that this person is extraordinarily skilled at making them feel that the discomfort in the relationship is their responsibility to fix. They leave an honest conversation feeling as though they owe an apology for having the conversation. They raise something that bothered them and find themselves, somehow, comforting the person who bothered them. They are handed the emotional labor of a dynamic they did not create, and they accept it because they have been trained by this relationship to believe that harmony is their job. This dynamic exploits cognitive empathy, the intellectual capacity to understand and model another person's inner state. These individuals have it in abundance. The person making them feel small frequently has the skill of emotional performance without the vulnerability of genuine feeling. They simulate distress precisely when accountability approaches. And the empathic person steps forward every time, like water rushing to fill any available space. The emotional consequence runs deep. Over time they begin to lose the map of where they end and the other person's emotional management begins. They cannot tell, anymore, whether their feelings are their own or a reaction they have been assigned. This is not weakness. This is what sustained psychological diminishment does to a well-functioning, caring human being. And all of these signs, the erased achievements, the edited voice, the stolen airtime, the weaponized humor, the drained recovery, the reversed accountability, all of them share a single root. They happen because this person has learned that certain people will absorb what is given to them and call it normal. And the most powerful thing any diminished person can do is refuse to call it normal anymore. And here is what most people never stop to realize about the ones who carry this. They are not naive. They are not weak. They are people who believe so deeply in the possibility of genuine connection that they keep showing up, keep extending grace, keep assuming the best, because somewhere in them lies the radical hope that people are better than their worst behavior. That hope is not a flaw. It is one of the most human things there is. So what can they do? They cannot simply turn off their sensitivity or their empathy. Those are not bugs in their system. They are the most sophisticated features they possess. What they can do is learn 3 specific psychological practices that, done consistently, rebuild the internal architecture that being diminished quietly dismantles. The first principle is to name what happened immediately after it happens, privately, specifically, and without minimizing it. Not "I'm being too sensitive," but "that comment was designed to reduce what I just achieved." The naming activates the prefrontal cortex and begins to interrupt the DMN's habit of absorbing negative framing as self-truth. The name does not need to be spoken aloud. It needs to be real. The second principle is to reclaim the edit. Every time they notice themselves shrinking their words before speaking them in this person's presence, they pause and ask, "What would I say if I were not afraid of what they would do with it?" They do not have to say the uncensored version out loud. But they write it down. They speak it to a trusted person. They let it exist somewhere outside the silence. The thought that is never expressed becomes the self that is never seen. The third principle is to adjust the emotional investment deliberately. This does not mean coldness. It means treating this relationship the way a good investor treats a poor-performing asset. They do not delete it immediately, but they redirect the percentage of themselves they were pouring into it toward relationships where the returns are real. This is what psychologists mean when they speak of metacognition applied to relationships, the deliberate act of observing your own patterns and choosing different ones. When they practice this letting go, not in anger but in clarity, something begins to shift. The exhaustion after encounters reduces. The internal editing quiets. The recovery time shrinks. They begin to notice that the version of themselves that exists in this person's presence is not the only version. And the other version, the one that laughs easily and speaks without measuring every word, has been waiting, patient and intact, just outside the door. They were never a candle that needed to be kept small so the room would not notice the brightness. They were always a steady, full flame, surrounded by someone who preferred to stand in the dark and call it comfortable. The moment they stop apologizing for their light, they will find that the room, the real room, the one filled with people who mean what they say, was always bright enough to see them clearly. These are people who think deeply about others, feel genuinely, and bring a quality of presence to their relationships that most people spend their whole lives searching for. They are not too much. They have simply been too long in rooms that were too small for what they carry. They deserve rooms with open walls and people who know how to stay. If this feels familiar, leave a comment about which sign fits you most. Tell us about the moment you recognized it. Because every honest comment here is a small act of courage, and someone in this community right now needs to read your words and know that what they felt was real and that they are not alone in it. If this video helped you feel a little lighter, a little clearer, or a little more certain that what you felt was not imaginary, please press like and share it with a friend who might be carrying this quietly. Thank you so much for watching. Do not forget to subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the psychology of the human experience, including the parts that are hardest to talk about and most necessary to understand.